everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I want to ask you to please remember to like and share these videos if you enjoy what I do, and so others can also find them. And also, please remember to subscribe to the channel. And make sure you click that little notification bell so you can be notified of my next uploaded videos. Mozambique is a country that is located in the southeast corner of Africa. Like many African nations, they found themselves being colonized by foreigners. In 1498, the Portuguese arrived, and by 1505, many Portuguese had arrived to their shores and made their way inland, settling and colonizing the country. And the country remained colonized until 1975, when they finally obtained their independence from the Portuguese. But make no mistake, their independence was not given to them. Like many nations, they had to fight for it. And there were many who stood up and fought for the cause of their people. One of those in particular is Josina Muthemba Machel. Josina was born on August 10, 1945, in Vilanculos in Hambo, Mozambique. She had a twin brother, and she came from a family who was very outspoken about the colonization of their country, which made her and her family a target. Her grandfather was a Presbyterian minister who spoke out against colonialism, and at one point, her father, two sisters, and two uncles were all jailed for participating in clandestine opposition against the Portuguese colonial administration. Her father was a nurse, and his job required him to transfer to different cities periodically. And so he moved his family with him whenever he would transfer to a new location. Josina and her brother attended a few different schools as a result of their fathers moving periodically. At 13 years old, she entered the commercial school Dr. Azevedo e Silva to study accounting. And at 15 years old, she joined the political organization named Núcleo dos Estudiantes Africanos Secundarios de Mozambique, or NESAM, which was founded by Eduardo Mondlane in 1949. Her political beliefs developed even more within this organization. And also, the organization and its members began to be watched by the colonial police. This led Josina to flee her country at the age of 18 years old. She fled with 8 other students. They traveled 800 miles until they reached the Rhodesia-Zambia border at Victoria Falls. Here, they were apprehended and sent back to Mozambique, where they were placed in jail for 5 months. On her 19th birthday, she was released. An international campaign led by Frelimo led to the crusade for her release. After being released, she began attending secondary school, but she was being watched by the police, so she eventually fled Mozambique 4 months later. This second attempt at fleeing would be the last time she would ever see any of her family again. She and the others that she fled with sought asylum in Swaziland. They were placed in a refugee camp for a short time, but they learned that they were found out and they were going to be turned over to the Portuguese authorities. So, with the help of a local Presbyterian pastor, they were able to escape just in time. So they traveled first by car, then by foot, then by bus, until the four of them reached Johannesburg, South Africa. In South Africa, they connected with what would be the equivalent of the American Underground Railroad. And from South Africa, they traveled to Francistown, Botswana. They joined 14 other people there who themselves were trying to get to Tanzania. But they were declared to be undesirable visitors by the British colonial authorities, and they were to be deported to Swaziland. But Eduardo Mondlane of Frelimo, along with the Organization of African Unity and the United Nations, brought tremendous international publicity to their situation, and this forced the British authorities to release all 18 students and allow them to go to Tanzania. So the group was released to the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, who arranged for them to travel to Lusaka, Zambia. There they stayed in a refugee camp for several days until they were handed over to a Frelimo representative. The group then traveled by multiple buses until they finally arrived in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Now, Josina, at this point, had traveled about 2,000 miles away from home. The group was weak and undernourished by the time they arrived. Josina has now reached her 20th birthday, and she immediately becomes active within Frelimo's quest for national independence. She works in various parts of the organization. She leads a lot of women's movements within the organization, and she plays a big role in establishing schools, daycares, pushing for girls to go to school and not be left out. She pushed for a lot of things within the community. She at one point even turned down an offer to study in Switzerland on scholarship. She wanted to continue working within Frelimo. She was dedicated to her nation receiving independence from the Portuguese colonizers. Josina became one of 25 women to undergo 3 months of military training at Nachingwea in southern Tanzania. The training facility was where Mozambique liberation fighters trained in guerrilla war. Josina Machel was the director of the training center at this time, and Machel would go on to become the first president of Mozambique, and eventually her husband as well. Now, Josina and the other women would guard supplies and facilities behind combat lines. This allowed them to free up the men for fighting so that the women could be used for guarding the supplies and facilities. The women of this military group would also go out to educate the locals so that they could learn about the Frelimo organization, and this was done in an effort to win the support and the morale of the locals. In 1968, Josina becomes a delegate to the Second Frelimo Congress. She is then appointed head of the women's section in Frelimo's Department of International Relations. In 1969, she really ramps up her advocacy for Frelimo and the local populations. And as I said earlier, she did a lot of advocacy work for women. She participated in the fighting. She advocated for the importance of sending girls to school, a bunch of different things. Now, at this point, the Frelimo president, Eduardo Mondlane, is assassinated in Tanzania by Portuguese agents. Now, Mondlane was married to an American woman named Janet Mondlane, and she and Josina were very good friends because they worked together within the organization on a lot of different things. So Josina moves in with his wife Janet, who, as I stated, is an American. She moved in to provide comfort and company to her in her time of loss. In May 1969, she marries Samor Machel in southern Tanzania at the educational center of Tunduru, which was a facility she helped to develop. And in November of 1969, she gave birth to Samor Jr., their only child. They called him Samito. In 1970, Josina began to have stomach pains and weakness, so she traveled to Moscow for medical treatment. There, she was diagnosed with liver cancer, and she is told to rest and to go on a very strict diet. But instead, Josina returns to her duties with Frelimo. Towards the end of 1970, she leaves her son Samito with a friend and takes a 2-month journey, on foot mostly, through Nisa province. She was there to assess the area and plan activities for the Department of Social Affairs. Now, the Department of Social Affairs basically did social outreach with the communities, providing anything from clothing, food, water, education, things that they may have needed, because at this time there was the war going on. You had the freedom fighters, which she was a member of the organization. There were other organizations who were in guerrilla warfare with the Portuguese because they wanted them out of the country. So they provided a lot of services for the local communities and a lot of communities that were affected by the fighting. Now, in March of 1971, Josina travels again, but this time to Cabo Delgado. There she evaluated the social programs that they had implemented there, and she joined in some of the marches for liberation. But she struggled during this trip because she was dealing with chronic fatigue and exhaustion. But in spite of that, she continued on with her work, even leading a meeting of more than 1,000 people. At this point, she is tired and very thin, so she decides to return to Dar es Salaam at the beginning of April. And as she is crossing the border into Tanzania, she stops. She hands her pistol to a fellow companion, and she says, and I quote, "Comrades, I can continue no longer. Give this to the military commander of the province so that it may contribute to the salvation of the Mozambican people." On April 5th, she becomes seriously ill and was taken to Muhimbili Hospital. And on April 7th, 1971, Josina died. She was only 25 years old, and she was buried in Kandani Cemetery, where her uncle, Mateus Muthemba, was also buried. Mateus was assassinated by Portuguese agents in 1968. A year after her death, on April 7th, that day was declared National Women's Day in Mozambique by Frelimo. In honor of Josina and all of her hard work and all that she stood for in her fight for women's rights and their right to participate in the war and education, and for everything that she stood for as a whole, this day, National Women's Day, was in honor of her. The country eventually gained its independence in 1975, and Josina's husband, Samor Machel, became the country's first president. Josina didn't live to see her country obtain the independence that she fought so hard for. She wasn't able to see her husband become the country's first president, but her son did. This is a reminder that sometimes our fights are not for us, but for the future generations. Josina Muthemba Machel was a fighter and a patriot for her people and her country, and she is someone to be admired for all of the hard work that she put in her short lifetime, for literally being willing to get on the battlefield and fight for her people. So guys, that's it for today's video. And as always, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment on what you think about today's story. I'll see you soon.